I've been talking about lenses lately, so I thought I'd talk about lenses some more. You can see I have up the Tamron 20 to 40 f2.8 Mark III. And I think this lens is incredibly fascinating. I haven't used it yet, and I don't know that I'll ever get to because unfortunately it's only for the Sony E-mount. And I do have access to Sony cameras, but I don't prefer using them. I actually prefer the Lumix cameras. And with Lumix, I'm stuck with the L-mount for full frame. And this is the type of lens I wish more companies would copy or take inspiration from. Meaning it's not your traditional 24 to 70 or 70 to 200 or 16 to 35. It's a 20 to 40 at an f2.8, which you might say, well, that's kind of odd and that's kind of short. And why would I want a 20 to 40? But this is actually what I can think of one of the more perfect lenses or better lenses for just general purpose. You see, there's this amazing micro four thirds lens that I've talked an awful lot about. It's the Leica 10 to 25. Full frame equivalent would be 20 to 50. And on micro four thirds, that 10 to 25 is a 1.7, which if you equate to full frame would be something a little bit slower than 2.8, but sort of around there, maybe like 3.5. I don't know what the exact math works out to because 1.7 is kind of a strange starting aperture. But if you think of crop factor, it also affects depth of field, like aperture values. So the equivalents are just the stops. So if you're coming from micro four thirds at like an f2, well, APS-C equivalent would be 2.8 and full frame would be f4. So somewhere between 2.8 and f4 is where that 10 to 25, that 1.7 would land. And so 20 to 40 is actually giving you the full frame benefit at a 2.8. It'll be perceptibly shallower. You'll get a little bit more of that background blur, but you still have the functionality of a 20 to 40. And you see, I think there's a lot of, I don't know why this happens in the lens world, but the focal length actually matters far more, I think, than the aperture to a certain degree. I don't really like the variable apertures. I like when it's constant. I don't want to have to factor in whenever I zoom, my aperture is changing to like, a 3.5 to a 5.6 or any variable apertures. I think that's kind of a non-starter for me. I can make it work. And yeah, there's certain lenses where I'm willing to make the sacrifice. But for the most part, I think constant apertures are where it's at. Tend to be a little bit more expensive, tend to be a little bit bigger. That's fine. I'm not about like compact travel, like take it with you when you're traveling the world being a tourist. That's not what I'm after. I'm after, quality, but also efficiency. And I think 20 to 40, that focal range is actually really, really valuable because, and here's the thing, a lot of people don't realize that focal lengths, like the millimeters, it's actually like there's an exponential fall off. I don't know which way the graph goes, but basically it goes, the wider the focal length, the more impact it has on the overall image in that field of view. So the difference between like a 20 and an 18 is far more significant, even though it's only 2 millimeters, than a 40 and a 42. And that only increases over time. So the difference between 100 and 110 or 120 millimeter lens is very insignificant compared to the difference between like a 10 to a 20 to a 30. And that 20 to 40 millimeter range, 20 to 50 and even 24 to 70 is where kind of the most action happens in terms of that field of view changing significantly. But what I'm frustrated with is that starting at 28 on the wide end or even 24 isn't really quite wide enough, I think, for modern content. I think 20 is actually the sweet spot of where it's at, where it's not distortedly wide, not obnoxiously wide. Around 18, I think, is where that starts to happen. And certainly 16 and 14 and 12, you get some crazy weird wide field of views where it just makes stuff look a little strange, a little abnormal. But 20, you get that effect, the wideness of that field of view without some of those negative downsides of the distortion that happens at those wider focal lengths. Now we move upwards, to 40. Yeah, that's a decent mid-range kind of focal length. Certainly 50 would be more traditional, more standard, but 40 is getting close. And I think that change that happens between 20 and 40 is very satisfying and very noticeable when you zoom. The other benefit of this lens is that it's actually kind of compact for what it does. Being a 2.8 on full frame, 20 to 40. Would it be better if it was 20 to 50 or 20 to 60? Yeah, I think that'd be better, but also comes with some trade-offs, some compromises or sacrifices, depending on what you're looking for. Price, size, weight, etc. Panasonic Lumix has a 20 to 60, but it's variable aperture. It's a 3.5 to a 5.6, and that's the one I had in mind when I made that equation. It's just kind of a non-starter for me. Those focal lengths are very valuable. 20 to 60, oh, incredible. But getting that to be a little faster at like a 2.8, that I think is a sweet spot. And I wish more lens companies were doing it, because right now Tamron, who I don't know if you know this, but their majority shareholder is Sony. So it's no surprise that the 20 to 40 is Sony E-mount only, unfortunately. But hey, lens designs have been copied or imitated many times over by many different companies. Lots of companies have 24 to 70, 70 to 200, 16 to 35, all sorts of focal ranges, shapes, and sizes. So I wish we had more things like this. Constant aperture and useful zoom ranges that start just a bit wider. Sigma is stuck on this 28 millimeter as their kind of end cap for their contemporary lenses, and I think that's a mistake. 28 is a nice focal length, I suppose, for some things, but it's just not really all as wide as you'd want it to be. 24 gets you there, but 20, oh, there's something about a 20 millimeter that I just love. I think it looks so great. And coming from that 10 to 25 on Micro Four Thirds, there's just so much power and functionality you can get out of a lens like that. And we need more of them for full frame. And it can be done. Tamron is doing it. So whenever I bring this subject up or talk about how I want like a 20 to 50, people will always point to this lens, but unfortunately it's Sony E-mount only. If we got an L-mount version of something like this, and I even think there's room for faster and slower lenses at those different price points that are the exact same focal range. Think about this. A lot of times you're picking between faster lenses and different focal lengths, and then slower lenses and other focal lengths. Maybe that doesn't make sense the way I'm describing it, but I don't know why there can't be a 24 to 70 that's like an f2, that's more expensive. Maybe it's bigger, maybe it's heavier, but then also a 24 to 70 that's a 2.8, that's cheaper, smaller, and then a 24 to 70 that's an f4 that's even smaller and cheaper than that. And in fact, that has happened many times over. The 24 to 70 has gotten those versions where there's like a 2.8 version and an f4 version. And I think there's maybe even an f2 version, depending on either Canon or Sony, whoever did that. I think that exists, or maybe it's a 28 to 70. I'm forgetting right now. But that's what I'd also like to see more of. Let's see the 20 to 40 f2 version that's bigger and heavier. So who's doing stuff like that? Sigma. They have the 28 to 45. That's a 1.8. Well, why not make a 28 to 45 if that's your focal range that you think is super valuable? That's like f2.8 and then f4. And just give me the focal range at those different apertures, and that will affect the size, weight, and price point. But I don't think anyone in their right mind would pick 28 to 45 as their perfect focal range. I think they'd be more interested in something like 20 to 40 or 20 to 45 or 20 to 50. Which to me is that perfect Leica lens for Micro Four Thirds. A 20 to 50 full frame equivalent, but on Micro Four Thirds, it's 10 to 25. It's a big lens for Micro Four Thirds. It's an expensive lens for Micro Four Thirds. It's a heavy lens for Micro Four Thirds. But those are sacrifices and compromises that I'm willing to make as the person buying the gear. But also, if you wanted something that was smaller, lighter, and cheaper, I wish there were a 10 to 25 f2.8 for Micro Four Thirds and a 10 to 25 f4 for Micro Four Thirds to be even smaller. So those are the things that I don't know why aren't happening. I don't know if enough people make enough noise about the actual focal length itself. More people pay attention to the aperture, like that Sigma 28 to 45. Oh my gosh, it's a 1.8. Yeah, it's a 1.8 for a range that's kind of odd. 28 isn't really wide enough to really offset that 45 end. Like you can shoot with the lens and you can zoom, technically you can zoom and you can get a few different looks out of it, but not like you could get on that wider end, like starting at 20, because again, those changes, those millimeters matter on the wider end. Again, it's exponential fall off. So if you're starting at 20, the difference between 20, 22, 24, 26, and 28, that change is significant on that end of the lens. And as you get closer to the longer end on the 40 side, the difference between 38 and 40 is not as significant as 20 and 22. I hope that makes sense. It's a lot of numbers, sort of some math, sort of some optics in there, but hopefully you understand the point. Paying attention to the focal ranges is actually, I think, more important than the aperture. The aperture will give you the blur. It'll give you the sensitivity to the light. You'll be able to shoot at faster shutters if you're doing photography, or you'll just be able to, shoot in lower light scenarios, and you can get more of that background blur that everyone knows and loves, got that sweet, sweet bokeh. But also there's the functional value of the lens in just what focal ranges is it covering? Can I zoom in enough? Can I get wide enough? And this range, 20 to 40, is quite captivating. It's quite interesting. And I wish this lens were on L mount. So if anyone's out there at Tamron, it'd be nice if you joined the L mount alliance, but also Sony is a major shareholder. I think they're the biggest shareholder in Tamron. I think they own 14% of the company. So maybe their hands are tied. Although at the same time, Tamron has made lenses for the Z mount, the RF mount, even micro four thirds. There's a Tamron lens for micro four thirds. So I don't know if there's anything holding Tamron back from being part of the L mount alliance. I'd love for them to join, because certainly the more lenses that are available for L mount, the better. Specifically this one. If I could just pick any Tamron lens, this would be the one, the 20 to 40. But also, I'd love for other companies like Sigma, like Leica. Hello, Leica made the 10 to 25 for micro four thirds. Where is the full frame equivalent? Come on, guys. This should be a no-brainer. That 10 to 25, very popular for a reason. And goodness knows it's not cheap. It's not like it's sold because it was so affordable. It's sold because it's so valuable in terms of the functionality and the speed. Both the aperture and the focal lengths are just perfect match. And then they follow it up with the 25 to 50, obviously another great lens. And then they got the 50 to 200 on top of that. It's like the holy trinity. It's the perfect trifecta for micro four thirds. I would love to see the full frame equivalent. Tamron is sort of doing it. So there's no reason that other companies couldn't be doing something similar. I'm not asking for an f1.2 zoom lens. I'm not asking for a 1.4 lens or even a 1.8 lens. That Sigma 1.8, the 28 to 45, the 1.8, that's nice, but I'd prefer more valuable focal lengths. 20 to 40, 20 to 50, 20 to 60, if you can stretch it. I don't know. 18 to 50, I would take that, but that's more of like an APS-C lens. I think that actually exists for APS-C, not for full frame, unfortunately, which 18 on APS-C, now we're back up to 27, 28 on full frame. So I'm sick of being stuck at 28 millimeters. That's not a fun focal length, I think, for anyone really. Yes, it's not wide, but it's not medium. It is wideish medium. I don't know. But a true 20 looks so nice. And yeah, I've got a 20 millimeter prime for full frame, which looks awesome. It's like my favorite lens, but it's a prime. And so it doesn't have the functionality that I would get out of a zoom that started at 20. Anyway, this video has probably gone on far too long. This lens looks cool. I'd love to use it on my cameras, but unfortunately I can't because Tamron's not part of the L mount. So they should join the L mount, or someone should get a clue and just make something like this. Sigma, Leica, DJI. This is where it's at. Let me know though. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Leave a comment because I'd love to hear your opinion.